Hello, my name is Lisa Netzer, and I'm an attorney with True North Practice Transitions. We are a law firm that helps dentists buy and sell their practices, and we also help dentists with employee questions, such as advice about employee hiring and firing, employee handbooks, and other steps along the employee process. Minnesota paid leave law is going to be a big change for a lot of small businesses, and so I'm really happy to be able to be here today and present this information to you. I am doing this in conjunction with Shannon Snell. She is the owner of the dental consulting company, and she's going to speak specifically to working with temporary employees. But for now, let's get into what we're going to cover today in this particular video. So probably the most important caveat to what we'll cover today is to mention that this information is not finalized. The Minnesota State Legislature is meeting right now. This new state agency is being formed as we speak. And so there might be information here that does not bear out later in the year. So we are hoping to bring additional training after the legislative session has concluded and we figure out what, if anything, has changed following that. But today we'll talk about big picture, what is Minnesota paid leave? We'll talk about some special provisions that apply only to small employers. And we will also, Shannon will then take over and talk in a separate video about temporary employee team members. How do you know you need them? How do you make that decision? And how to make the most of those employees. So nothing is set in stone here, but you do need to know that Minnesota paid leave is a national trend. Minnesota is the 14th jurisdiction to have a mandatory paid leave law, but it is far from, this is something we're seeing happening all over the place. There are 12 states that have some form of a volunteer program or have a program that only applies to large employers. We also know another 12 states have Minnesota or a program for paid leave in their legislative sessions in 2025. So we expect to see more states coming online with this particular program, and it's simply a trend that is happening around the country. Minnesota paid leave is a program that looks a lot like Minnesota unemployment. And in fact, the two agencies are going to work together because they base their information and the payments to employees on the wage information you supply to those agencies. So you're going to see that just like Minnesota unemployment, Minnesota paid leave takes the information about your wages that you report on a quarterly basis. And Minnesota employment might grant payments to an employee after they leave your employment. Minnesota paid leave is going to do the same thing, except they'll be determining a short window of time, the paid leave benefits, and they will be paying out that money to employees directly. But unlike Minnesota unemployment, number one, you have an ongoing relationship with that employee. And number two, you are administering that leave time. So it's a lot like Minnesota unemployment, but it's not as though the state is simply taking care of everything for you and you don't have to think about it. One more big difference between Minnesota paid leave and unemployment. With Minnesota unemployment, if people make a claim, you could face a higher rate of paying back into Minnesota unemployment. But with Minnesota paid leave, there is no penalty to you as an employee, as employees use leave. So the amount paid as the part of the payroll tax to support the program might change, but it applies to everyone across the board. It does not just apply to your particular company. Right. Sometimes it's good to know what paid leave means in comparison to other things that we already have established here in Minnesota. So a couple of years ago, Minnesota applied parental leave, 12 weeks of leave, to all employers across the state. This 12-week unpaid leave was required of all larger employers. But in the last 2 years, most of the dental offices I've worked with know that they now must provide at least 12 weeks of unpaid leave for the birth or adoption of a child. And we all went through in the last couple of years some major changes with earned sick and safe leave time, making sure you either have a paid time off program that is compliant or a separate earned sick and safe leave program that is specific to that statute. So another change, but that is for short-term absences from work, and this new statute is going to apply for longer term time away from the office. And finally, it's important to understand that a lot of the information and the leave provisions in Minnesota paid leave are based on the federal Family Medical Leave Act. The Family Medical Leave Act has been around since the 1990s. It requires unpaid leave for medical conditions and for time off due to the birth or adoption of a child, but it has always applied to 50 employers with 50 or more employees. This is a big change because we're now going to take similar provisions and apply them to employers with fewer employees, but that again is part of the national trend we're seeing all around the country. Minnesota paid leave is going to be a lot like FMLA, but it's going to be different. We're going to have our own twist on this. And probably the biggest difference is that the maximum time allowed away is more than 12 weeks. It potentially could be up to 20. And it might be best to understand this with an example. You might have an employee in your dental office who is pregnant, and then the last 2 months of her pregnancy, she needs to be placed on bed rest. So she might need 8 weeks of medical leave to deal with a bed rest order from a doctor. And then they take 12 weeks following the birth of the child to have bonding time. So that's a medical leave provision and a family leave provision. It adds up to 20 weeks. And that's the maximum benefit someone could have in 1 year. And what does 1 year mean? Well, 1 year means starting from the first day leave is taken. So if someone takes some leave and then uses up all 20 weeks possible, or 12 weeks if it's just medical leave, or 12 weeks if it's just family leave, they have an entire year before they can get a new amount of family leave or medical leave. Sometimes this doesn't work out so well for people. You might have someone who takes 12 weeks off for the birth of a child and then has a family member who has a serious medical condition and they want to be able to help out. But if they've used that 12 weeks, that's the maximum they can have for family leave. Same thing with a medical condition. Someone might have a diagnosis or treatments that they have to take early in the year, and then maybe unfortunately later in the year, but less than 12 months from when they started taking leave. They have additional leave for a car accident, a fall, or something like that. If that sort of thing happens, it's a maximum of 12 weeks. So that is the maximum. You can't double dip from different buckets. They have to truly be for different reasons. When we talk about Minnesota paid leave, the teeth of Minnesota paid leave is to ensure that employees come back to the same job that they left. And it's important to understand that the same job means everything down to the details. Their specific position, the status, the seniority they have, and probably most importantly in a dental office, the same schedule. So sometimes people have worked really hard to get the schedule that they wanted, or they waited for someone else to leave so they could take over a particular schedule. They are entitled to come back to that specific schedule when they have been gone on leave. So it's important to remember that when you are figuring out how you're going to cover somebody's leave. You can't just simply give their position to someone else or make someone full-time by covering their leave and then not give that person, the returning employee, the same time schedule and things like that coming back. So we're only a few slides in, and I've already been throwing around a few terms that we probably need to define. One of the most important is, what is a serious medical condition? And the statute is meant to cover things that are a long-term time away from the office, not something that would apply for earned sick and safe leave. So anytime you have inpatient care, whether it's a hospital, a rehabilitation center, or other facility, if it's inpatient care, it's going to qualify as a serious medical condition. But sometimes that serious medical condition, they might be just in the hospital overnight or just in the ER until they're released, waiting surgery. For those sorts of situations, you can have incapacity that is caused for 7 or more days, or something that's due to pregnancy, or something that's due to a chronic health condition. And now we've got another term that we need to define, that what is a chronic health condition? You'll notice that these definitions are pretty loose. They're kind of out there, but a chronic health condition is something that requires treatment over a period of time. It might be episodic rather than continuing. So consider someone who has a cancer diagnosis. You might, for that person, have an initial surgery. So maybe there's 2 weeks out for handling and recovery from surgery. Then a period of radiation, and that might be a specific daily appointment that's going to knock them out for a while. So maybe they take 4 weeks off for a radiation session. But then unfortunately, they have to continue on and have continuing treatments after that. And that might be 1 day a week going forward. So this whole chronic health situation, something that can be episodic, it all relates back. It's all going to be considered a chronic health condition. And if you were wishing that the government would just put together a list of what is a chronic health condition or a serious medical condition, forget about it. They tried to do that with the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, and it became a nightmare. So we have these kind of vague definitions instead. Let's talk about who's a family member. I really wish that the legislature just could have taken the definition of family member from earned sick and safe leave and put it into Minnesota paid leave, but they didn't. And once again, we have a legislature who's trying to deal with a new structure for families these days. There are a lot of people who have children together who are not married. So instead of trying to define it just by relationships that were often defined by blood or marriage, we have the kind of the exception that swallows most people. Any individual who has a relationship that creates an expectation and reliance on the applicant for care. So if someone has a great aunt who's like a grandmother to them, they're probably going to qualify as a family member. It's an expansive definition, and it's not the same as earned sick and safe leave. So please get ready to edit your employee handbook if you have a definition of family member in there. I want to return to bonding leave for just a moment because most people have an experience with people being out upon the birth or adoption of a child. That is, someone being gone for 12 weeks and that's it. What's really important is that the leave for any type of leave, whether it's their own medical condition or a family leave, can be taken intermittently. And that means we might see some changes with how families deal with a young child and the costs of daycare for that child. So example might be that you have two parents. Parent number one decides to stay home for 12 weeks with the child full time. So they take their 12 weeks of leave and then they need to return to work. But parent number two decides, well, if I take these 2 days off a week and my mom can cover 1 day a week and my spouse can or partner can handle another day a week, then we don't have to pay for childcare. You might see them deciding to take 2 days off a week or 1 day off a week to help avoid those childcare expenses because they've become so astronomical. So you might be used to thinking of bonding leave has to be 12 weeks total. It doesn't. It can be intermittent, and you need to work with your employees on what their expectations are for that leave. Right. This particular slide, I apologize for all of the verbiage on the slide, but the idea of giving notice for taking paid leave, it's the devil's in the details. And so here are the details. Right now, as long as the way the statute is written goes forward, employees have to provide 30 days notice if something is foreseeable. But that's all. I know that I work on a lot of employee handbooks for dental offices, and often we require 60 days notice to use vacation or other leave provisions. And of course, this is only when 30 days only applies when it is foreseeable. So let's say someone has a unexpected diagnosis or a accident or something like that. It's not foreseeable. They can ask for leave, the moment they need it, if that's what's needed. The other thing is that some dental offices require people to make application for leave in a written form. The statute is very clear that that's not required. They can sit down and talk with you, they can give you a phone call, or they can send you a text. So you can't also define the way they're going to get a hold of you. It has to be compliant with the statute. You can't require that they fill out this nice form you created or things like that. Also, though, you can designate that they have to talk to the right person. So a staff member can't call up another staff member and say, I need leave, and then all of a sudden they're gone. That doesn't work. You can require them to talk to a specific person, such as your office manager, your front desk person, the owner, or the supervising dentist. Whoever that should be in your office should be clear in your handbook. Finally, I've had a lot of questions about earned sick and safe leave and what kind of documentation people can ask for. The documentation here for paid leave is pretty specific. You can ask for a copy of the employee's certification with Minnesota paid leave. Certification really here means application. And that piece of documentation is going to tell you about when they expect leave to start, what the duration is it going to be continuous or intermittent, and what their schedule of treatment is. Always knowing that some of that stuff might change, but at least we know what the application says. And after the leave has been granted, Minnesota Paid Leave will send you, as the employer, a notice that has some specific information about the leave in it as well. So two forms of documentation, both the application and what's granted by Minnesota Paid Leave Program. I know I mentioned retaliation earlier. We talked about the person has a right to come back to the same job with the same benefits, schedule, all those sorts of things. And but I wanted you to know a little bit more about what we mean by retaliation. I'm not really worried about a dentist. Someone comes in and says, I need time off for X, and they say you're fired. Or that someone comes back from leave, and again, the dentist is like, you're fired. I'm not worried about that. I am worried though about dentists complaining that the new statute is going to cost them an arm and a leg, or that you express anger when an employee gives you their notice, or you talk badly about an employee who's out on leave with the other employees. Don't do it. Any of that could be considered obstruction or putting up an impediment to other employees applying for benefits. So just don't go there. You are allowed to complain about this big change in how you do business. You can complain to other doctors. You can complain to your CPAs. You can complain to your consultants. You can complain to your attorneys. All of that is fine, but don't complain in front of any of your employees about this big change. You really don't want to be hit with the idea that you were obstructing someone from taking leave in some way. And one final thing I want to mention, I know I talked about the fact that the employee has the right to return to the same schedule. There might be a situation where the employee is coming back and they want to go change up their schedule, or maybe switch days or things like that. If that works for you, that's great. You can accept that change. Just document that the employee requested it, or document that you offered the employee a change and they accepted it. Just make sure you document, so that when someone comes back and says, hey, when that person came back from leave, you did this other thing, just make sure an explanation is really clear in the employee's file. Right. This is a slide that might at first glance seem really simple or obvious, but the more you get into it, the more complex it gets. So employees already get a lot of great benefits from you. So they get PTO, they get vacation, they might get sick, they get holiday pay. All those are things that an employee can use to cover time away from the office. So how do those benefits interact with Minnesota paid leave? There's two ways that they interact. Number one, the employee can decide to use part or all of some accrued benefits and Minnesota paid leave. They just can't use them at the same time. An example is an employee needs to go out for shoulder surgery. They're going to be gone for 6 weeks. That employee has 2 weeks of PTO saved up. So the employee uses 2 weeks of PTO and then 4 weeks of Minnesota paid leave to cover the rest of the time. Why would an employee do that? Well, Minnesota paid leave is a replacement, a partial replacement of someone's wages. It's not 100%, unlike PTO. So most employees might want to use their PTO time. There might also be a situation where you have someone who has a huge amount of PTO saved up. They're going to be gone for 6 weeks because of shoulder surgery, and they decide not to use any of their PTO. Instead, they're going to use Minnesota paid leave for the entire 6 weeks. When they get back, they still have 6 weeks of PTO. So it's up to the employee if they want to use that time or not. I think most often this comes up with people who are gone on bonding leave, who want to have some flexibility when they come back in case they have a sick baby right after they come back to work. But you have to be careful, number one, not to let people have huge amounts of PTO time laying around And then they can use Minnesota paid leave to cover an extensive absence. But they have to pick one or the other. They can't use both. And you cannot force them to use up their PTO while they're away on a leave. So both things need to be true. Also, one note for your employee handbook. You need to make sure that your employee is not earning any PTO, earn sick and safe time, or other benefits while they're out on leave. So it should be clear in your handbook that if you are gone on leave, you are not earning or accruing additional benefits during that time, including holiday pay or things like that. So make sure that that is clear in your handbook as well. This slide is meant to give you an idea of the kind of benefits people will have when they use paid leave. The idea here is not to give you the exact amount because the benefits, as they're calculated by the state, use a complex formula, and all benefits are maxed out if the employee earns, and this is a real sentence, 150% of the Minnesota average weekly wage. So every year, Minnesota determines what the average weekly wage is. 150% of that right now, this year, is around 1,300 some dollars. So no employee is going to get paid more than 1,300 some dollars while they're away. So as employee wages go up, you're going to get further and further away from that 100% replacement. But even someone who's a lower wage employee, earning about $20 an hour, is still only going to get 90% of their wages while they're on. So it's not 100% replacement, but you can expect that this benefit really helps those people who maybe didn't have the cash flow to be able to choose to be out on leave to take care of a child or for following the birth of a child. This is going to be something new, especially for those lower paid employees, but for higher paid employees, there's still going to be an incentive to come back to work because they are not going to be anywhere near their actual payments while they're out on leave. These next two slides apply to small employers, and in both cases, small employer means you have less than 30 employees. I know that applies to a lot of dental offices. So right now, there's a possibility that you could have a reduced premium depending on the number of employees in your office. What you would do is we look at the standard premium for the taxes, which right now is set as 0.7% of your payroll. And Minnesota, under the statute, the employer can pay 50% of that or more. Well, why would you want to pay more than 50%? Well, as you can see, the annual benefit and reduction for having fewer employees is actually pretty substantial. So it might be the case that if you only have 5 employees, it makes a lot of sense for you to cover 100% of that 0.7% of payroll. Now, just a caveat here. I believe this is probably the most likely area you'll see changed in the 2025 legislature. The 0.7 amount of payroll will probably go up. I don't know how high it will go up, but I expect it to increase. There's just been a lot of data about how much money is needed to cash flow this type of program. So if there's a change in Minnesota to this particular statute, this might be the biggest area, but I definitely think the reduced premiums for small employers will still be in place. And next slide. Again, if you're a small employer, you can also apply for a grant if you decide to hire a temporary employee to cover someone who is out of the office. It's not a huge amount of money. It only is about $3,000, and there's a limited pool. And this is another opportunity for the legislature to step up and maybe make that pool a little bit bigger going forward. But if you are a smaller employer and you have the ability to apply for a grant and you're going to need that temporary employee, this will defray a bit of the cost. It's not perfect. And we're going to get some more information about this particular program later this year. All right, so 2025, we are in July going to get some more information about those grants. So keep an eye out for that information. And then by December 1st, you need to let all of your employees know about Minnesota paid leave. Now, the commissioner of Minnesota paid leave will probably put out one of those information posters that you need to put up in the employee lounge or the break room. In addition, they will also have probably a shortened version of what Minnesota paid leave is, and you can provide a copy of that either through email or physically on a piece of paper to each employee. I suggest that you document in each employee's file that they have received that notice. Right? And then in 2026, we start administering this program, which will be an interesting change for all of us. This is going to be a challenge, I know, for some small offices. And so therefore, I'm going to encourage you to click on the next video that where Shannon Snell is going to talk about working with temporary employees, determining when you need them, what you should pay them, and how to make the most of them. So for now, I'm Lisa Netzer. Thank you so much for your time today and best of luck with all this. You can reach me anytime. Thanks.